It's funny, isn't it? How we go through life thinking we're safe. We lock our doors, we avoid dark alleys, we stay in the light. But what if I told you sometimes the real danger isn't something you can predict? These stories aren't legends. They aren't just figments of imagination. These are real experiences from people like you and me, ordinary moments turned into nightmares. And tonight, you might just find yourself wondering, could it happen to you? Story 1. I still get chills whenever I think about that night. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening at home, but it turned into a nightmare that haunts me to this day. I had recently moved into a small, cozy house nestled at the edge of a dense forest. The serenity was a welcome change from the bustling city life I'd left behind. That evening, a heavy rainstorm had rolled in, blanketing the area with a rhythmic sound of raindrops against the roof. I settled into my living room sofa with a good book and a cup of tea, relishing the peaceful ambience. As the hours ticked by, the storm intensified. Lightning flashed intermittently, illuminating the dark silhouettes of the towering trees outside. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the back of the house. I jolted upright, my heart skipping a beat, probably just a branch falling. I reassured myself, trying to dismiss the unease creeping up my spine. But then it happened again. Thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Panic surged through me. Someone was breaking in. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. No service? Of all times, I muttered, cursing the remote location I'd once found charming. Remembering that the nearest neighbor was a mile away, I knew I was on my own. I crept toward the kitchen, the source of the noise, clutching a fireplace poker tightly in my sweaty grip. The house was eerily silent except for the pounding rain. Peering around the corner, I saw the kitchen window shattered, glass shards glistening on the floor. The cold, wet wind billowed the curtains inward. Then I noticed muddy footprints leading away from the window, disappearing into the darkness of the hallway that led to the bedrooms. My bedroom. Is someone there? I called out, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound assertive. Silence. A sudden flash of lightning lit up the hallway, and for a split second, I saw a figure, a tall man with a gaunt face, staring back at me with piercing eyes. He wore tattered clothes soaked from the rain, and his expression was void of any emotion. I gasped, stumbling backward. "What do you want?" I shouted, desperation seeping into my voice. He didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step toward me. The dim light revealed a long, jagged scar running down the side of his face. My mind raced. Think, how do I get out of here? I thought, glancing toward the front door. Mustering every ounce of courage, I darted toward the door, but my foot caught on the corner of the rug, sending me crashing to the floor. The poker slid out of my hand, clattering out of reach. Pain shot through my ankle. I tried to scramble up, but he was already looming over me. "Why are you doing this?" I pleaded, tears welling in my eyes. He tilted his head, observing me like a predator studies its prey. "You took everything from me," he whispered in a hoarse voice. "I don't even know you," I protested, fear paralyzing my thoughts. He was clearly deranged. He knelt down, his face inches from mine. The smell of damp earth and something foul filled my nostrils. "You don't remember, but I do. Every night," he hissed. I racked my brain. The memory was faint, but it surfaced. Years ago, I'd been in a car accident on a rainy night. I hit something on the side of the road, but never stopped. I always thought it was a deer. "Was it you? That night on Hollow Creek Road?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the pounding rain. His eyes flashed with rage. "You left me there. Left me to die," he snarled. I thought it was an animal," I stammered. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." He stood up, shaking with anger. You should have stopped." Before I could say another word, there was a sound outside, a car pulling up the driveway, tires crunching on the gravel. The man's head snapped toward the noise, and for the first time, I saw panic in his eyes. Taking advantage of the distraction, I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the door, yanking it open just as the car headlights illuminated the front of the house. I stumbled out onto the porch, waving frantically. The driver got out. It was my neighbor, the one who lived a mile down the road. He had come to check on me because of the storm. "I heard someone scream," he said, rushing toward me. "What's going on?" But when I turned around to point to the house, the man was gone. There was no trace of him. As we searched the house together, my neighbor noticed something I hadn't: a muddy handprint on the sill, smudged as though someone had climbed through. The police came, but there were no leads. No one fitting the man's description was ever found, and the case was eventually closed. I moved out of that house a month later. But every time it rains, I think about that night, about the man I left on the side of the road, and the one who found me years later. And I can't shake the feeling that one day, he'll come back to finish what he started. Story 2. I still don't know what possessed me to take that shortcut through the woods. It was late, I was tired, and the long, winding road back home seemed unbearable after the grueling double shift I just pulled at the hospital. I had taken the long way dozens of times, but that night something in me snapped. I wanted to get home as fast as possible, and I figured the path through Silver Pines Forest would cut my commute in half. Everyone in town had their own stories about the forest, passed down for generations. Disappearances, strange sounds, sightings of people who didn't quite seem real. But I never paid much attention. I figured they were just ghost stories meant to keep kids from wandering too far, or maybe even to stop out-of-towners from exploring the woods. It was already past midnight when I turned off the main road and onto the narrow dirt path that led into the trees. The sky was clear, the moon was bright, and my headlights cut through the darkness like knives. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. For the first mile or so, I felt fine. The road was bumpy, and I had to slow down to navigate the twists and turns, but it felt like any other night. I turned on the radio, hoping some music would keep me awake. But as the trees grew thicker, the signal faded into static. I left it on anyway, needing something, anything, to fill the oppressive silence. About halfway through, I realized just how isolated I was. The trees were so dense they blocked out most of the moonlight, and my headlights barely reached 10 feet in front of me. The silence became heavier, pressing in on me, amplifying every little noise my car made. A creak in the suspension, the crunch of gravel under the tires. Each sound felt like a warning. As I drove deeper, my anxiety started to build. There was no phone service out here, no street lights, no sign of another soul. The air inside the car felt thick and claustrophobic, and I rolled down the windows, hoping for some relief. But instead of fresh air, an overwhelming stench hit me, thick and putrid, like something had been rotting nearby for days. I gagged, quickly rolling the windows back up, my heart beginning to race. I told myself to keep going. The road had to lead out eventually. I checked the clock, 1:12 a.m. I would be home in 20 minutes tops. That's when I saw them. At first, they looked like nothing more than shadows, dark shapes standing in the distance, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield. 3 figures, motionless in the middle of the road, staring in my direction. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the steering wheel, unsure of what to do. Were they lost? Hurt? My mind ran through every possibility. Maybe someone's car had broken down, or hikers had gotten stranded. But why would they be standing there like that, in the middle of the road, not even moving as I approached? I inched closer, my heart pounding in my chest. Something wasn't right. Their bodies were too still, their faces shrouded in darkness. As I got within a few yards, my headlights caught their eyes, wide, unblinking, and too reflective. I slammed on the brakes, my tires skidding on the gravel as I came to a stop. They didn't flinch. I honked, hoping to scare them off, but they stood their ground, eyes locked on me. There was something deeply unnatural about the way they just stood there like mannequins posed in the middle of nowhere. My instinct screamed at me to back up, to get out of there. But as I shifted into reverse, something changed. One of them took a step forward. I froze, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The figure, a man, stepped into the full beam of my headlights, revealing a face I'll never forget. His skin was pale, almost gray, his eyes too large and glassy, like they weren't meant to blink. His mouth hung slightly open, slack, and he moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle, like he didn't have full control of his limbs. The other two followed, moving in sync, stepping closer to my car with each passing second. My brain screamed for me to move, to drive, but I couldn't. My body locked in place, paralyzed by fear. That's when the man in front raised his arm, slowly, methodically. In his hand, he held something long and metallic, a crowbar. I snapped out of my stupor, slamming the car into reverse and flooring it. My tires spun in the dirt for a terrifying second before finally catching traction. The figures kept walking, unfazed by my frantic retreat, their eyes glowing in my rearview mirror as I sped backward down the winding path. Branches scraped against the sides of my car as I navigated the tight turns, barely able to see more than a few feet behind me. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw them standing at the bend in the road, still watching, still waiting. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished into the shadows. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I kept driving, my foot pressing the gas pedal to the floor, heart racing in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the end of the forest road and turned back onto the main highway, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I didn't go home right away. I drove straight to the nearest gas station, parked under the bright fluorescent lights, and sat there, shaking, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I checked my phone, still no service. I didn't know who to call. The police? What would I even tell them? There were 3 men, standing in the woods, moving like they weren't human. It sounded insane, even to me. After a while, I got out of the car and looked at the front of it, half expecting to see some kind of damage from when I'd reversed so fast. But it wasn't the car that stopped me in my tracks. There, scratched into the dirt on the hood of my car, were 3 long, deep marks. They ran parallel to each other, perfectly straight, like they'd been made by claws or a tool of some kind. A crowbar? The stench from the woods still clung to the car, thick and heavy in the air around me. I backed away, terrified of even touching it, convinced that whatever had happened in those woods wasn't over. That night, I went to a friend's house and crashed on their couch. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, the way they stood, the way they moved, those reflective eyes tracking me like prey. In the morning, I decided to drive my car to a mechanic just to check the scratches. Every time I drive at night, I catch myself glancing into the trees, searching for those figures. And I know, deep down, that they're still out there, waiting for someone else to take that shortcut. Someone who won't be as lucky as I was. Story 3. I never thought much about the importance of locking doors until last summer. Back then, I lived in a modest 2-story rental on a quiet suburban street. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved but didn't really know each other, and kids played in their yards until the sun went down. It felt safe, too safe, I guess. It was a Friday night, and I had plans to go out with a few friends. I'd just gotten home from work exhausted, so I decided to take a quick nap before heading out. I remember collapsing onto the couch, leaving the windows open to let in the warm summer breeze. The front door was unlocked, but I didn't think twice about it. After all, nothing bad ever happened in our neighborhood, right? I must have drifted off deeper than I intended, because by the time I woke up, it was dark outside. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Too silent, like the world outside had been muted. The air felt thick and stagnant, no longer carrying the soft hum of insects or the distant bark of a dog. Groggy, I reached for my phone. My friends had texted me, asking where I was, but it was already past 9 p.m. Guess I missed that. I mumbled to myself, sitting up and stretching. That's when I felt it, a shift in the air. You know how you can tell when someone's in the room with you, even if you don't see or hear them? That sudden awareness hit me like a punch in the gut. I stood up slowly, scanning the dimly lit living room. Nothing seemed out of place. The front door was closed, and the windows still let in the occasional flicker of passing headlights from the street. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then I heard it, the creak of a floorboard upstairs. My body froze, blood turning cold. I lived alone. No one was supposed to be up there. For a split second, I thought maybe it was the house settling, but the noise was deliberate, like weight shifting on wood. Footsteps, slow and careful. Panic surged through me. Every rational part of my brain screamed for me to run, to get out of the house, but I found myself rooted in place, listening. The footsteps continued, moving across the upstairs hallway toward my bedroom. I don't know what possessed me to move, but I grabbed the nearest object, a ceramic vase from the coffee table, and tiptoed toward the stairs. My hands were shaking so badly, I thought I'd drop it. I had no plan, no idea what I'd do if I actually came face to face with whoever or whatever was up there. The stairs creaked beneath me as I made my way up, each step feeling like an eternity. My heart pounded in my chest, so loud I was certain whoever was up there could hear it. As I reached the top landing, I noticed the door to my bedroom slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond it. I stood there, gripping the vase tighter, listening for any sign of movement. The silence was suffocating. Just as I was about to back away, the door creaked open another inch. That's when I saw him, a man, standing in the shadows, just barely visible in the faint moonlight streaming through the window. He wasn't a large man, but there was something about the way he stood, completely still, that sent ice down my spine. His head was slightly tilted, as if he'd been watching me the entire time. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing, trying to process what I was seeing. Who was he? How had he gotten inside? And why was he just standing there, watching me? Then, as if reading my thoughts, he took a single step forward, into the light. My breath caught in my throat. He was holding something, a small knife, the blade glinting in the pale light. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and his lips curled into a small, almost satisfied smile. I did the only thing I could think of. I hurled the vase at him, missing by a mile as it shattered against the wall. The sound jolted him out of his eerie stillness, and before I could react, he lunged toward me. I turned and ran, my feet barely touching the stairs as I bolted down them. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps fast and heavy, gaining on me. I made it to the living room and yanked open the front door, practically throwing myself outside. My legs carried me down the street, past houses that felt so close but somehow unreachable, like a bad dream where everything slows down when you need to move the fastest. I could hear him behind me, his breathing heavy, footsteps pounding the pavement. I didn't stop, didn't look back. My only goal was to make it to my friend Dana's house a few blocks away. She was always home on Friday nights, binge-watching her true crime shows. She'd understand what I was feeling right now. She had to be home. I cut through backyards, ducking under trees, my lungs burning as I pushed my body to its limits. Finally, Dana's house came into view. I sprinted across her yard and pounded on the door. "Dana, open up. It's me," I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. The door swung open, and Dana's face paled when she saw me. "What the hell happened?" she asked, pulling me inside. I quickly locked the door behind me, breathing hard, my body trembling. I tried to explain, but my words came out in panic gasps. I told her someone had been in my house, that he'd chased me. She grabbed her phone and immediately called the police. It felt like hours before the officers arrived, though in reality, it was probably only minutes. They took my statement and searched my house, but the man was gone. There was no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. It was like he had never been there. Except there was something I hadn't noticed when I ran out of the house, something I wish I hadn't seen later. When the officers were getting ready to leave, one of them pulled me aside. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we found something upstairs near your bed. I need you to take a look." He led me up the stairs, and there, on my nightstand, was a small, folded piece of paper. It hadn't been there before. My hands shook as I unfolded it. All it said was, "I'll see you again soon." That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with Dana. I never returned to that house. The police never caught him. No matter how many times I changed addresses, phone numbers, even moved cities, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting. It's been months since that night, and I've done everything I can to move on. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up with the feeling that someone's watching me. A soft creak outside the window, a shadow shifting in the hallway, or a faint whisper of footsteps on the floorboards. And each time, I wonder if it's him, waiting for the right moment. Each of these stories could have happened to anyone. The familiar becoming foreign, the safe spaces turning dangerous in an instant. It's that sliver of reality, the thin line between safety and danger, that makes them stay with you long after the lights go out. Because deep down, we know the world isn't as predictable as we think. It's full of shadows that can strike when we least expect it. Now, before you settle into bed tonight, just ask yourself, how well do you know your surroundings? Are you sure that locked door is enough? Maybe, just maybe, you'll double check. Because sometimes, the stories we ignore are the ones that come back to haunt us. Stay safe, but stay curious, and always, always stay aware.